Hi, everybody. I hope you all had a great study break. I guess it wasn't a spring break quite, but a great study break. I really enjoyed chatting with everybody, and I learned a lot. And thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for showing up. And I hope you got some good rest in. I think, given the range of responses to the in person option, we're going to stay virtual. We're just going to ride the pandemic out until we're sure it's done, and we'll stay virtual for the rest of the semester so you can plan accordingly. Um, yeah, and if you have questions about that, feel free to email me. I'm so sorry I can't be with you today. I've got an appointment this afternoon that I can't move that's conflicting with class. So I'm going to walk you through X-bar theory, which is the big, exciting new thing that we're adding to our sort of paragraph or tree diagramming skills. And X-bar theory basically takes the phrase structure rules we've been developing, trying to figure out how all these phrases go together, and provides some depth, I guess, to the phrase structure. So we'll see as we go through what I'm talking about there. But for many of you who struggled with constituents that are made up of constituents, X-bar theory is here to address that struggle, right? That there are some constituents that are more important or more relevant um, to the sentence than others. So phrase structure rules, we've already gone over. What do they do well? They capture constituency relationships. They explain distribution and the order of categories, whether adverbial phrases come before or after verbs, and things like that. They explain modification relationships, including ambiguity. So they help us figure out where little branches of the tree go. And they capture structural relations like constituent command, like C command, that's necessary for capturing relations like binding facts. Chapter 5 is about binding. It's only about 10 pages long, I think, and it wasn't assigned. But you could have a look at that if you're curious about that. It's about pronouns and antecedents. So when pronouns refer to something in the sentence, like a reflexive pronoun, like themselves or herself, or whether they refer to something out in the world, an entity out in the world. Sorry. So quick review, there are important linguistic units called constituents, and we can test for them. We do substitution tests, replacement tests, modification tests. Constituents are created by rules. Those are our hypotheses about how words go together in a sentence. Constituents are subject to the principle of modification. You know, you attach stuff in so that modifiers are sisters of the head that they modify so that you can see their relationship. The geometry, domination, precedence, or C command matters. It makes a difference where, to the meaning of the sentence often, but to how you diagram the sentence, certainly. So what we've got right now are phrase structure rules that give us kind of a flat structure. The tall student of physics with red hair. So you can see, I saw the tall, and you could replace that, student of physics with red hair, not the short one with brown hair. So is student of physics a constituent by itself? If so, you know, it's interesting. The diagram here doesn't exactly reflect that. It reflects everything as a constituent, right, of the NP. Or is the constituent student of physics with red hair? I saw the tall one, not the short one. If so, then here's our constituency, right? And you can see the problem where constituency diagrams sort of fall in different branches. I saw this tall student of physics with red hair, not that one. And here you've got a constituency test that captures everything, right? So what we do to try to tease out the different constituents in this large constituent is N-bar structure or X-bar structure. X-bar is the sort of abstracted. So N-bar structure adds a level in between these different constituent phrases to help tease them apart. Let's look at that again. So here you've got an N-bar that's the student of physics. You've got an N-bar that's the student of physics with red hair. You've got a higher N-bar that's the tall student of physics with red hair. And then the whole noun phrase is the tall student of physics with red hair. And these triangles are just a shortcut to sort of see the big structure here without getting down to determiners and prepositions, like the individual things like that. So N-bar rules. How do we know when to put an N-bar in? So a noun phrase consists of a determiner and an N-bar. An N-bar consists of an adjective phrase that's of optional and an N-bar, or an N-bar and a prepositional phrase. And then an N-bar is made of the noun and the preposition. So just like above every ADV, we've been putting an ADVP, now above every N, we'll put an N-bar, which is marked here with the parentheses. When it was first created, it was marked with a bar across the top of the letter, which is why how we get the name bar theory, S-bar theory. So this middle one is an iterative self-recursive rule. So you'll notice it's got that thing where an N-bar is made of a noun and a prepositional phrase, and then a prepositional phrase can be made of a noun phrase and a preposition. So that's where that recursivity stays in the middle there. That becomes important later. So we use a test to figure out how to sort out the N-bar nodes, the one replacement. So you can replace an N-bar node with the word one, not the N and not the noun phrase. So you can't replace the noun with one. If you try, it won't make sense. You can't replace the whole noun phrase with one. If you try, you will have lost something. But the N-bar node you can replace with the word one. So the tall student of physics with red hair. The short one of chemistry with brown hair, that doesn't really help us, right? It is grammatical, but it's kind of a dialect issue, right? Some dialects find it. The short one with brown hair, there we go. Now we've got something that's that passes a grammaticality judgment. The short one, right? Or the tall one, so you can see. The one, or this one. So this N-bar we can replace with one, and we can say the one. Here we can say the tall one, right? But if we just say one at the top, we don't know what the noun phrase is referring to anymore. Flat structure in verb phrases. Okay, so just like you get that flattened structure where all the prepositional phrases and adjective and adverbial phrases seem to be just as important to the sentence, but they are definitely different constituents, we have that issue in verb phrases too. So a verb phrase consists of as many adverbial phrases as you want. The verb is required, an optional noun phrase, optional adverbial phrases after, optional preposition phrases, all these as many as you want, and optional adverbial phrases after the prepositional phrase. So this is our rule, our hypothesis for what a verb phrase is made of. And here you can see, here's our verb phrase, often sings opera loudly at church. John often sings opera loudly at church, and Mary does so too. So that does so too lets us know that often sings opera loudly at church is, by some tests, a single constituent, right? The whole thing. John often sings opera loudly at church, and Mary frequently does so too. All right, so now in this one, does so too manages to replace these things, and we don't lose meaning, right? So is the constituent often sings opera loudly at church, or is it sings opera loudly at church? John often sings opera loudly at church, but Mary rarely does so in the library. So here the does so is replacing sings opera loudly, right? So now is the constituency sings opera loudly in church or in the library, or often sings opera loudly at church. Sings opera, right? So this may seem mysterious, putting your V bar here when you just come down from a VP straight to a V bar, but there are reasons for it, and we'll see them in chapter 8. For now you know when you hit that VP, you're going to go straight down to a V bar. That'll be your first step. So here with the V bar, we've got our adverbial phrase often, right? We've got our verb sings. We've got the object of the verb, opera, right? The noun phrase that complements it. We've got the adverb loudly, and then the prepositional phrase in church. And each of these that sort of made a constituency of its own becomes its own V bar. So V-bar rules. A verb phrase is made up of a V-bar. So that's just sort of like a standard operating procedure. The V-bar is made up of an adverb phrase, an optional adverb phrase, a required V-bar, or V-bar and a complement adverbial phrase or prepositional phrase. And then V-bar is made of a verb and a noun phrase, optional noun phrase. That's like a transitive verb. So if the V-bar is just a verb, it's an intransitive verb, like I slept, right? This optional noun phrase is the complement, if there is one. Again, this second rule is an iterative self-recursive rule. It can apply as many times as needed because these prepositional phrases we know can turn into noun phrases or complementizer phrases, right? You start to get that iteration. So this is the do so to replacement. Just like we had the one replacement from N bars, we've got the do so to replacement. So you replace a V bar node with did so to. It doesn't work for verb phrases. You get an ungrammatical construction or one that doesn't help you give you any information about what's happening in the sentence, and it doesn't work for the verb. John often sings opera loudly in church, and, or but, Mary does so too, right? Often sings opera loudly in church. Our adverbial, our V bar comes down to RV and noun phrase. Adverbial. Seldom does so folk songs quietly in the library, right? So you can't put does so here for the verb, right? Mary often does so opera loudly in church doesn't make sense. So you know it won't replace the verb. Seldom does so quietly in the library. Okay, John often sings opera loudly in church, but Mary seldom does so quietly in the library. You don't really have to change those, but it's just another way to see if you can replace the constituents. John often sings opera loudly in church, but Mary seldom does so in the library, right? So here for these V bars, it's working. It makes a grammatical construction. John often sings opera loudly in church, but Mary often or seldom does so. So even this V bar, at every V bar level, you can use this does so replacement for the constituent. John often sings opera loudly in church, and Mary does so too, right? So further evidence for V bar. Here's your V bar. Eat beans and toss a salad with a fork. So in this one, we know that with a fork is modifying both eats beans and toss a salad. A fork is used for both of these operations. And the V bar helps us join them all so that they're sisters, right? In this one, the prepositional phrase is a sister to this V bar, and that makes it modify everything in that V bar. A constituent command. Flat structure in prepositional phrases. So just like in noun phrases and verb phrases, we can have this flat, what we currently have with phrase structure rules is a flat structure in prepositional phrases. Tara is very in love with her boss. So preposition is made up, that should be a prepositional phrase. It's made up of a preposition and a noun phrase. Prepositional phrase can be an adverbial phrase, a required preposition, an optional noun phrase, and a optional preposition phrase. So this only shows up with the idiom in love and fixed expressions like it, but it helps prove the point. This is another piece of evidence that you can inject an adverbial phrase in between the preposition or before the preposition. So very in love with her boss, right? Here's your adverb very, here's your preposition in, noun phrase, noun love, and then with her boss. Mary was very in love with her boss. Susanna was less so. So we know that here, in love with her boss is a constituent based on this substitution. Is one constituent, right? In love, is in love the constituent by itself, right? Can you replace it? Mary was very in love with her boss, but less in love with her husband, but less so with her husband. So if you can replace it and still keep a grammatical structure. So in love is its own constituent, as well as in love with her boss, right? And that makes it its own. So our P-bar rules, right? A prepositional phrase goes straight to P-bar, just like the verb phrase goes straight to V-bar. It's a vacuous rule. That means you just do it automatically. It's the thing you do. All right, P-bar goes to or consists of an adverbial, optional adverbial phrase in a P-bar, or a P-bar in a prepositional phrase. And then a P-bar consists of a preposition and a noun phrase, which is what we're accustomed to. If you think about diagramming from the bottom up, right, you get that preposition and noun phrase, and now you'll put a P-bar above it. Again, that middle rule is an iterative, a self-recursive rule where prepositional phrases and noun phrases can be nested within each other. Again, we'll see this, that we do this for a reason in chapter 10. There are other elements that can be introduced here, and we don't often see them, but in order to have space in the diagram to diagram them were they to arrive, then we would need that space there. Think of it as like when you do the complementizer phrase, sometimes it has a C and sometimes it doesn't, but you still diagram the CP so that you've got room to attach that complementizer if it appears, right? Very in love with her boss. We've got a prepositional phrase. It goes to a P-bar, an adverbial phrase, very, and then my P-bar got kind of lost. It should be up here, which comes down to in love, our preposition and our noun phrase, complement, and then with her boss. We had some of these this helps sort out too with ditransitive and transitive verbs when that prepositional phrase is an adverbial phrase that's describing something about the verb, and when it is a complement, like it's another argument in the prepositional phrase. So less evidence for this, but it does exist. What about adjective phrases and adverb phrases? For parsimony reasons, that just means for length, for reasons of length, we'll assume the following rules, that just like prepositions, nouns, verbs, the adjective and adverb phrases will go to an adjective bar or adverb bar. Adjective will go to adverb and P bar, or adverb bar and prepositional phrase, and then adjective consists of an adjective and a prepositional phrase. We actually moved to a place where we just call these APs, and we don't necessarily distinguish between adjective and adverb phrase at the high level. And then there's an equivalent set of rules for adverbs, right? It would look the same but have ABs here if you didn't go. So here are our new rules, which probably will go through further revision as we collect more evidence. This is a lot of rules to keep track of, and we're already keeping track of a lot of rules. Is there a simpler way? Are we missing any generalizations? Is there something we can say about these rules that make it the same across all these categories? So here's our noun, our N-bar rules, our V-bar rules, our ADJ bar rules, and our P-bar rules. So generalization, 1 to 3 types of rules, right? There's generalization 1. There are 3 types of rules. For each major category, there are 3 types of rules. A rule that generates the phrase. So a noun phrase consists of a determiner and an N-bar. A rule that iterates. Remember, we noticed in each of those, that middle rule had an iterative element so that we can account for recursion, right? So a rule that iterates. The N-bar consists of an adjective or adverbial phrase and an N-bar. And then a rule that introduces the head. Finally, we get to the bottom, to the very last word. And that is where the N-bar consists of an N, a required N, and an optional prepositional phrase. So that first rule we call a specifier rule, right? It specifies, it has the determiner in it, basically, right? It helps set up the noun phrase. The second rule we call an adjunct rule. It's for all the prepositional phrases that just add additional, or adverbial phrases that add additional information. So when you get that recursion where you say, I went to the store with my friend after 11 o'clock on a Saturday, right? Those are those recursive prepositional phrases that are oblique, right? They give more information, but they're not complements, right? They're not the noun direct object or indirect object of the phrase. And then finally, the rule that introduces the head, and that has the same letter as the phrase does. So if it's an NP, this is your N. If it's an ADVP, this is your ADV, right? If it's a prepositional phrase, this is your P. And it's complement. So think about like the direct object or the sort of, you might have learned them as predicate adjectives, right? Like I was frightened, right? Frightened is the predicate adjective. It's whatever completes the verb, the action of the verb. Generalization 2, headedness, right? In each rule, the only item that is required, that is obligatory, is the item that gives its category to the node that dominates it. This simply means the only required item for an NP is an N. The only required item for PP is a P. Although we can argue about that. Because prepositions are weird. The only required item for a VP is the verb. So the NP is a determiner and an N bar. The N bar is however many adjective phrases, and the N bar is a noun and a prepositional phrase option, right? So the N is the only required element here. There are no rules where a noun phrase requires a verb or an adverb or adjective phrase, and this is called endocentricity. Endocentricity just means that the only required element of the phrase is whatever gives the phrase its name, right? Nouns for noun phrases, verbs for verb phrases, like that. All right, generalization 3, optionality. With the exception of determiners, we'll talk more about that in the next chapter, all non-head material is both phrasal and optional. We've been doing that for a long time. We've been putting an ADVP above our adverb, even when there's only one adverb, right? Even when there's no other, it's not really a phrase in the way we think of it. We've been putting ADJP above the adjective, even when it's only one word, and that's the adjective. So all non-head material is both phrasal and optional. So a noun phrase consists of a determiner and an N bar. An N bar consists of optional adjective or adverb phrase and an N bar, and then an N bar consists of a noun, a required noun, and an optional prepositional phrase. So all these are phrases, except the pesky B, which we'll talk about in this chapter. So the goals of X-bar theory, believe it or not, are to simplify the system of rules. Those 3 rules apply to every category, and so that's a way of simplifying the system. It also wants to capture that intermediate structure, that idea that when you say, I went to the store is important. All the other prepositional phrases that come after it are just additional information. So how do we mark in our trees that to the store is complement, is closer in, I don't know, more necessary to the meaning of the sentence than the sort of recursive phrases that we can add on forever. Capture the cross-categorical generalization. So X-bar theory helps us understand that it's not just noun phrases that work this way. Verb phrases, prepositional phrases, adverbial and adjectival phrases all work this way. And we'll use variables to do this. This is that abstracted level where instead of using the NVP, the things we know as examples, we use other letters of the alphabet. A variable is a category that can stand for any of the syntactic categories, right? So X, Y, W, and Z are variables that can stand for N, V, A, or P, right? So here are the X-bar rules. They'll be slightly revised later, but here's what we're arriving at. We have the specifier rule. XP consists of YP, an optional YP, and X-bar, right? The adjunct rule. X-bar consists of an optional ZP and an X-bar, or an X-bar and optional ZP. that order makes a difference because when you're moving across languages, some languages will have the adjective before the noun and some will have the adjective after the noun. And this is a way to make the rules flexible enough. Well, it's a way of making parameters so that you can say all languages have this rule, but the different languages have parameters for where the elements, whether the elements come before or after. And then the complement rule, X bar, consists of X and WP, where X can stand for any category, NV, ADJ, ADVP. X must be consistent through the three rules. So if you're working through a phrase with this formula, your X will be the same all the way across, right? If this is a noun phrase, then all of these X's will be replaced with N. If it's a verb phrase, they'll all be replaced with V. So here's X bar structures. We've got an XP, it's got a YP, an X bar that's made up of an X bar and a ZP, an X bar that's made up of an X bar and a ZP2, right? So you can think of these as different prepositional phrases. And then finally, we get down to the X with a complement, the WP. So for a noun phrase, it looks like this. Nouns all the way down, right? And these are different adverb phrases or adjective phrases or prepositional phrases, right? And then here's the complement phrase. For a noun, that would probably be, well, it could be a prepositional phrase or a noun phrase. If you had something like, oh, head of lettuce, famously from that example, right? Head of lettuce would be here. Of lettuce was a complement phrase for that. And here with VP, X bar structure rules for VP look like this, right? You got your verb V bar, a V bar with an adjective or adverb, V bar with a prepositional phrase maybe, and then finally your verb with its complement. All right, and then adjective phrase, we've got the same thing. We've got adjectives all the way down, ADJ bars till we get to the adjective, and then these represent other phrases that belong in that adjective phrase. Sometimes adverb phrases, sometimes other adjective phrases. And the same thing with adverb phrase, right? These look the same. Preposition phrase, we've got our P bar all the way down to our preposition. So constituency tests show us there is intermediate structure in phrases, and the evidence varies in strength, right? But we know from the constituency test that we did, that some adverbials, some prepositional phrases, some noun phrases seem to convey more information or be more necessary to the meaning of the sentence than others. And so constituency tests kind of show us that because of the way they can be, a constituent can be made up of several several prepositional phrases or just one prepositional phrase in the same sentence. There are cross-categorical generalizations to be made. So we've got three rules: specifier, adjunct, and complement. We've got headedness and endocentricity, which just means that every noun phrase is going to end with an obligatory noun. Every verb phrase is going to end with an obligatory verb. When you get to that point, you know you can stop, right? And then the modifiers are all optional and they're all phrasal. So our X bar rules, we've got the specifier rule, which starts us off, right? XP, it consists of YP plus X bar and X bar. We've got the adjunct rule, and this is the one that has prepositional phrases or adverbial phrases that can have recursion, or noun phrases that can have recursion. And then we have the complement rule, which takes care of direct objects, sometimes indirect objects, and predicate adjectives, predicate nominatives, things that the verb, we use this with being verbs. We haven't really talked about that very much yet, but if you say like, I am a scholar, right? Scholar is not the direct object. It refers back to I, right? So it would be part of the complement of the verb phrase. Whoa. So yeah, this is still pretty messy, right? There's still kind of a lot going on. And we'll clean it up a little bit as we move into the next chapter and as you work through the homework, right? We'll discuss the differences between the specifier, complement, and adjunct rules. Right now, I'm just encouraging you in your diagramming to start playing with these, to start inserting these N bar, V bar, P bar, ADV bar, right? Um, we still need to account some for cross-linguistic variation. I mentioned that just a little bit. You can read a little at the end of this chapter about that. And then we'll tidy up some ugly loose ends, like the lack of motivation for the specifier rule. Why do we do that? The fact that determiners aren't phrases. Why aren't determiners phrases, right? We go through that motion of adverb and adjective phrases. We've been doing that from the beginning, but we haven't been doing it for determiners. So we'll talk more about that in the next chapter. And the fact that we haven't talked at all about how the TP rule fits into this system, right? So that's looking forward, what we'll do next. At this stage, your main goal is to look at the examples in the chapter and work through the homeworks to try to start integrating this intermediate structure. And after I get through my appointment today, I'll try to record some short examples of diagramming sentences with the new X-bar rules. Thank you so much for joining, and please email me if you have questions, and I'll see you next week.